Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, stepped into the Metropolitan Bank in Washington, D.C., holding a $50,000 check for her husband Nicholas Rio's real estate project. Today, she wanted to handle the transaction herself, proving her independence. In a simple blazer, Karoline felt confident, yet slightly nervous, a faint smile on her lips as she passed through the glass doors. The bank was opulent with marble floors. DI signs boasting, "We welcome all." Elizabeth Carter, the teller behind the counter, gave Karoline a sharp look. When she handed over the check, Elizabeth squinted, recognizing her from the media. $50,000? Elizabeth said loudly, her tone skeptical, loud enough for nearby customers to turn. "For someone like you, we need to check thoroughly." Karoline felt a flush of heat, her heart raced, but experience with criticism kept her composed. "This is legitimate money," she said firmly, sliding papers across the counter, including the project contract and verification. Elizabeth took the check, lips pursed, clearly in no rush to process. And she glanced at Sarah, a nearby colleague. As if signaling something, Karoline clenched her fist, a sense of injustice rising. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Karoline Leavitt stood before the counter, her gaze locked on Elizabeth Carter, who still held her $50,000 check. With blatant suspicion, the luxurious space with marble floors and DI signs plastered on the walls now felt stifling. The whispers of surrounding customers prickled at Karoline's pride, but she kept her face calm, shoulders straight. Though a storm of emotions raged inside, she knew Elizabeth wasn't just doubting the check, she was targeting who? She was. Elizabeth set the check down slowly, as if deliberately dragging out time. "We have strict regulations," she said, her voice icy, "especially for large transactions from people like you." The final words were sharp, cutting like a blade. Karoline clenched her fists, nails digging lightly into her palms. She caught Elizabeth's meaning instantly. "People like you," referred to her role as White House press secretary, a vocal conservative, supporting Donald Trump, labeled an adversary by the liberal media. It wasn't her first brush with political bias, but its brazenness right in the bank stunned her. "I provided all the documents," Karoline replied, her voice steady, striving to stay composed, as she did during tense press briefings. She slid a stack of papers toward Elizabeth, the real estate project contract verification from Nicholas's company, and even banking permits. "If there's an issue, tell me." Elizabeth skimmed the documents, but her eyes never left Karoline. "We've had trouble with certain funds," she said, pausing, as if choosing her words, "tied to controversial political campaigns." The words hit like a punch. Karoline felt blood rush to her face. Elizabeth was implying her money might be dirty due to her Trump ties, a baseless accusation, but enough to make her feel insulted. She took a deep breath, recalling her House campaign in New Hampshire, when liberal articles twisted her every word back. Then she learned not to let emotions take over. "This check is from my husband's company," she said, her voice sharper. "If you need verification, I can call him now." Elizabeth smiled, but it was a fake smile. "No rush," she said, turning to Sarah, her nearby colleague. Sarah, a young woman with dyed green hair, glanced at Karoline and whispered something to Elizabeth. Both smirked, quiet enough that no one could hear clearly, but loud enough for Karoline to know. They were mocking her. She felt cornered, though still standing right at the counter. Customers around began noticing more. A middle-aged man in a suit stole a glance at Karoline, then whispered to his companion, "Is she from the White House?" A young woman in a shirt with an environmental slogan shook her head disapprovingly, as if Karoline's presence was an affront. Karoline realized the bank wasn't just a place for transactions, it was a stage, and she was being cast as a villain. Suddenly another employee, Mark, appeared behind the counter. He was young, seemingly neutral, and when he met Karoline's eyes, he gave a slight nod, as if saying, "I get it." That small gesture of empathy eased her, if only briefly. Mark picked up Karoline's documents, scanned them quickly, and looked at Elizabeth. "Everything seems fine," he said softly. Elizabeth shot Mark a look, as if ordering him to stay quiet. "We can't rush," she said sharply. "This bank has standards. Not everyone gets treated like a VIP." The word slapped Karoline in the face. She realized Elizabeth wasn't just delaying her, she was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. Karoline opened her phone, pretending to check messages, but she started noting Elizabeth Carter doubts, check political jabs, favors other customers she learned from her White House days, record every detail. Because truth needs proof. She glanced around, spotting clear bias. An elderly couple entered, warmly greeted by Elizabeth and ushered to a VIP area. Meanwhile, a man in a shirt with conservative logo was told to wait. Like her, the pattern was blatant. Elizabeth picked who to favor, and Karoline wasn't on the list. She recalled a Fox News interview when a reporter tried trapping her. With a DI question, she'd answered that true fairness means equal treatment for all, not biased by political labels. Now she was living that contradiction, a bank flaunting DI, but discriminating against her for her conservative stance. The wall clock ticked, counting each 10-second Elizabeth returned, holding Karoline's check. But instead of processing it, she set it aside. "You'll have to wait." She said coldly, "We need more verification." It could take hours. Karoline felt pushed to the sidelines. She wanted to confront to demand a manager, but she knew escalating now might let Elizabeth spin her as disruptive. She breathed deeply, deciding to observe. More, her phone buzzed, faintly a text from Nicholas Yu. "Okay, call if you need me." She smiled, faintly feeling bolstered, but she wasn't ready to call him. This was her fight for now. Elizabeth moved to another counter, starting a transaction for a new customer, a woman, in a shirt with an equality slogan. She beamed, her voice friendly. "We'll handle this right away for you." Karoline gripped her phone in justice, weighing like a stone on her chest. She kept noting favors customers by political views. She didn't know where these notes would lead, but she was certain Elizabeth was making a mistake, and she wouldn't let it slide easily. An older customer, seeming to recognize Karoline, approached. "You're Leavitt, right?" he asked, voice curious. Caroline nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes." He smiled faintly, but before he could say more, Elizabeth cut in, her voice falsely sweet. "Sorry. We're busy, Miss Leavitt. We'll have to wait." The way she stressed Karoline's name felt like a spotlight on the whole bank. Karoline felt eyes boring into her. Some were curious, some cold, some seeming to side with Elizabeth. She stood there amid the bank's grandeur, but felt like an outsider. The whispers grew louder, an unwanted soundtrack. But Karoline didn't bow her head. She knew this was just a start, and she wouldn't let Elizabeth win easily. Elizabeth was now busy with a new customer, a young woman in a rainbow-printed jacket, clearly the type she favored. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Elizabeth said, her voice sweet to the point of fakeness. Karoline tilted her head, watching the contrast was stark. Just minutes ago, Elizabeth had eyed her like a threat, questioning her check, as if she were a criminal. Now she smiled brightly, as if the bank existed solely for those who matched her views. Karoline stepped back, leaning against a window frame, feeling the glasses chill through her blazer. She didn't want to draw more attention, but she knew she was being watched. The security guard stood a few feet away, his gaze flicking to her periodically, as if she might suddenly cause trouble. She smiled bitterly to herself. She had stood at the White House podium, answering global press, now treated like an unwanted guest in a Washington, D.C. bank. She pulled out her phone, opened the notes app, fingers gliding fast. "Elizabeth keeps favoring customers' hostility aimed at me, tied to politics." The words were her way of staying calm, turning helplessness into action. She recalled a night in New Hampshire during her House campaign, when an elderly voter told her, "They'll try and knock you down, but you're stronger than that." Those words now burned quietly within her, keeping her steady despite her heart pounded with anger. She glanced around, seeing the bias wasn't just against her. A man near the counter in a jacket with conservative group's logo was told to fill out more forms by Sarah, Elizabeth's colleague, with a curt tone. Meanwhile, a couple entered holding papers and chatting about a progressive charity event, and Elizabeth led them straight to seats with a beaming smile. Karoline noted, clear bias pattern nod. "Just me." Mark, the employee who'd shown sympathy, passed by holding a stack of papers. He glanced at her, his eyes briefly apologetic, but he didn't linger. Sarah stood nearby, whispering to another worker, her gaze flicking to Karoline with a smirk. She felt like an unwilling actor in Elizabeth's play, forced into the role of the outcast. She thought of Nicholas, of their son Nico, playing at home with a nanny. She remembered Nicholas hugging her after a long day, saying, "You don't need to prove anything to anyone, but I know you'll do it." She wanted to call and vent about this injustice, but she held back. This was her challenge, and she wanted to face it herself. And now the bank's whispers swelled like waves hitting shore. A young customer, wearing a backpack, muttered to a friend, "She's a Trump lady, right? No way she's being discriminated against here." The tone dripped with doubt, as if Karoline were exaggerating. She kept her face blank, but inside she wondered, why did a simple deposit turn into a political fight? Why did she have to prove she deserved fairness? She looked at Elizabeth, now helping another customer sign papers with fake enthusiasm. Karoline saw Elizabeth didn't just want to delay her. She wanted her to feel small and visible. But Karoline wasn't one to crumble. She'd face high-stakes meeting rooms, razor-sharp press, questions, a bank teller. No matter her schemes, couldn't break her. Karoline Leavitt leaned against the window frame of the Metropolitan Bank, fading sunlight casting her shadow long across the marble floor. The isolation felt like an invisible wall, but she refused to let it shake her. Her phone still open to the notes app held lines about Elizabeth Carter's bias like a map guiding her through the storm of injustice. Customers' whispers and Elizabeth's clicking heels echoed, but Karoline stayed focused, her eyes sharp as when. She prepped for White House press battle. Suddenly, a figure entered the bank, drawing every gaze. A tall man in an expensive gray suit, his commanding presence clear in every step. Karoline squinted, a sense of familiarity nagging her. Elizabeth mid-paperwork. With a customer froze, she dropped her task, hurrying to greet him, her voice syrupy. "Mr. Thornton, such an honor to see you today." The name Thornton jolted Karoline. James Thornton, she recalled Nicholas mentioning him, the rival real estate CEO, always thwarting her husband's projects. Karoline leaned forward, straining to hear, knowing her spot was risky. Elizabeth led Thornton to a dim corner near the manager's office, where light barely reached. She furtively handed him a small USB, its confidential label glinting faintly under the lamp. Thornton nodded, a pleased smile crossing his lips, saying something too soft for Karoline to catch. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just bias, it was a plot, possibly tied to Nicholas. She opened her phone, hands trembling slightly, switching to camera mode, zooming in. She tried capturing Elizabeth passing the USB. Sunlight glaring off the window made the screen hazy, but she snapped a few shots before Thornton pocketed the drive. Karoline typed fast. Elizabeth gave confidential USB to James Thornton. 3:15 p.m. plot against Nicholas's company. She knew this was dangerous. If Elizabeth noticed, she could paint her as a troublemaker, but she couldn't stand idle with truth in plain sight. Elizabeth glanced around as if sensing eyes on her. Karoline ducked her head, faking a text, check, her pulse racing. She remembered a White House moment, catching a reporter twisting Trump's words for a scandal. She'd learned then to hold evidence, wait for the right move. Same now. She needed more before confronting Thornton. Turned to leave, but Elizabeth tugged him back, whispering urgently. Karoline strained, catching fragments. Project Rio. Can't know her husband's name. Chilled her. Nicholas's big real estate project, a multi-million-dollar complex, might be the target. She noted Thornton knows Nicholas's project. Elizabeth sodding him. She glanced at Mark, the sympathetic employee. He was sorting papers near the counter, his eyes flicking to her, hinting at something. Karoline nodded faintly, hoping he'd help, but she knew she couldn't rely on anyone. Yet Sarah, Elizabeth's colleague, moved closer to the corner, as if backing her up. Karoline saw Elizabeth wasn't alone. There was a network here, and she was caught in its crosshairs. Elizabeth suddenly spun back, her gaze sweeping the bank. Karoline felt a chill as their eyes locked. Still here, Elizabeth snapped, striding toward her. "I told you to wait, but don't think you can roam free." She signaled the guard, who stepped closer to stare, intimidating. Karoline stayed calm, though her heart thudded. "I'm just standing as you asked," she said, evenly, eyes fixed on Elizabeth. She knew Elizabeth was trying to scare her, to weaken her, but Karoline wasn't easily broken. She'd face high-pressure rooms, cutting questions. A bank teller, no matter her plots, couldn't make her flinch. Elizabeth huffed, turning away, but not before barking at the guard. "Keep her there, don't let her bother other customers." The guard nodded, positioning himself like a living barrier between Karoline and the bank. She felt caged, but she didn't let anger take over. She checked her phone, the USB photos clear. She sent Nicholas a quick text, trouble at the bank, don't come yet, I'm handling it. She wasn't ready for him to step in. This was still her fight. She thought of Nico, her little boy waiting at home. She wanted to be with him to forget this injustice, but she knew she couldn't quit. If Elizabeth and Thornton were targeting Nicholas, she had to act not just for family, but for others who might fall victim to such schemes. Thornton left the bank, his steps confident, like a victor. Elizabeth returned to the counter, her smile gone, replaced by tension. Karoline watched, seeing her worry. Maybe she knew she'd slipped. Karoline noted Elizabeth tense after Thornton. She knows she's exposed. She breathed, deeply resolved, surging the photos, the notes. They weren't just proof, they were weapons. She recalled her father's words from childhood: truth always wins, but you must be strong to defend it. Now she was doing just that. Elizabeth might think she held power, but Karoline knew the moment for truth was near. Karoline Leavitt's eyes stayed glued to Elizabeth Carter, who just returned to the counter after seeing James Thornton off the photos on her phone. Elizabeth handing over the confidential USB were like an unlit fuse, but she knew it wasn't time to use them. The isolation and the guards' worried glances made her feel trapped in a glass cage, but she refused to waver. Customers' whispers and Elizabeth's clicking heels pulsed like a drum beat, urging her to act. Elizabeth flicked her eyes toward Karoline, a cold stare with a mocking smile. "Still patient, Miss Leavitt," she called out, her voice dripping with scorn, stressing Karoline's name to draw attention. Sarah, nearby, giggled as if they were staging a play with Karoline. As the punchline customers began turning, some curious, some annoyed, as if she were the cause of trouble. Karoline felt heat surge to her face. She'd endured enough to bias, the delays, now public insults. She stepped forward, voice steady, But controlled, I've waited over an hour. My check is legitimate papers. Complete. Why haven't you processed? And Elizabeth looked up her. Smile vanishing. Don't rush, Miss Leavitt. She snapped. This bank has rules. Not everyone gets special treatment, especially people. She paused, as if weighing her words, and added, like you who stir controversy. The word stabbed, aimed straight at Karoline's conservative reputation. She breathed deeply, recalling White House press battles where one wrong answer could ruin a career. She knew Elizabeth was baiting her, wanting an outburst to label her a troublemaker. I'm not asking for privilege, Karoline said, calm but sharp. I'm asking for fairness like any other customer. Her words silenced the bank for a moment. A young customer earbuds and whispered to a friend, she's got a point, but Sarah jumped in, voice shrill. Fairness? You think you deserve it after what you stand for? She hinted at Karoline's conservative policies, making some customers nod, while others shook their heads in frustration. Karoline felt like she was an unofficial trial. Elizabeth, the judge, Sarah, the prosecutor. She glanced at Mark, the sympathetic employee. He stood behind the counter holding papers, eyes anxious. But silent, she gave him a slight nod, as if saying, I'm fine. But she knew she had to act now. I'm not here for political fights, Karoline said, her voice ringing, grabbing the bank's attention. I just want to deposit money. If you can't do that, I want a manager. Her demand hit like a stone in still water, making Elizabeth freeze. She opened her mouth to reply, but Karoline pressed on, voice sharper. And I want to know why you were dealing with James Thornton over there. Was it about my check? The question struck like lightning. Elizabeth paused, gripping the counter. What are you talking about? She stammered, her shaky voice betraying panic. Sarah stepped up, defending. Don't slander her, you're just making trouble. But Karoline stood firm. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen, ready to show the USB photo. I have proof, she said, voice low but powerful. One explained it to everyone in the bank when still customers swapped glances, some murmuring, some staring at Elizabeth. An older man in a suit spoke up. What's going on here? I've been waiting. Too. Discontent spread, flustering Elizabeth further. She signaled the guard. Get her out, she's disrupting. The guard approached, but Karoline held her ground, eyes fixed on Elizabeth. I'm not leaving, she said, voice steely. I have rights here, and I know what you're doing. She thought of Nico, the value she upheld, justice, truth. She couldn't let Elizabeth win by shoving her aside. Just then the bank swung open. A tall figure entered his commanding presence. Halting the room, Karoline turned, heart racing, recognizing Nicholas Riccio in a dark coat. His gaze swept the bank, landing on her. Karoline, he called, voice deep and firm. What's happening here? Elizabeth spun around, her fake smile back. Mr. Riccio, what a surprise, she said, trying to sound professional. Just a minor misunderstanding. We're handling it. But Nicholas ignored her. He walked to Karoline, eyes concerned yet resolute. You okay? He asked, his voice soft just for her. Karoline nodded, but her eyes burned. Not okay? She said quietly, she's not just stonewalling me. There's something bigger tied to Thornton. She handed him her phone, the USB photo on screen. Nicholas glanced at it, his face tightening, eyes turning icy. Karoline Leavitt stood beside Nicholas Riccio, her eyes blazing with resolve despite the tightness in her chest for what had just unfolded. Nicholas's arrival, with a commanding presence and steady voice, brought the bank to a standstill. Customers stopped, whispering, their eyes fixed on him. Elizabeth Carter behind the counter clung to a professional smile, but her hands gripped the edge, tightly betraying her panic. Sarah, her colleague, stepped back, her gaze wavering, as if she wanted to vanish. Karoline knew the moment for truth to speak had come. Nicholas stared straight at Elizabeth, his eyes cold as steel. You called a minor misunderstanding, he asked, his voice low, but forceful, silencing any interruption. I want to hear exactly what's going on with my wife's transaction. He turned to Karoline, his gaze softening briefly. Tell me, Karoline. Karoline took a deep breath, feeling a solid anchor in his presence. She stepped forward, her voice clear, unwavering. I came to deposit a $50,000 check for our project. I provided all the documents, but Miss Carter refused the process. It delayed for over an hour and treated me like a criminal. She paused, her eyes locking onto Elizabeth. She implied my political stance was the reason, called me controversial, and I saw her give a confidential USB to James Thornton. Your arrival. Karoline's words landed like a slow motion explosion. Customers murmured louder, some eyeing Elizabeth suspiciously. An older woman near the counter muttered, Thorne, that's serious. Elizabeth's face drained of color, her lips twitching, but silent. Sarah tried to interject. She's making it up. No, Thornton was here, but her trembling voice lacked conviction. Nicholas raised a hand, signaling silence. He took Karoline's phone, scrolling to a photo of Elizabeth, passing the USB. This isn't made up, he said, his voice cutting. Turning the screen to Elizabeth. What did you do with this USB? Why was it in Thornton's hands? He stepped closer, his gaze piercing her. I've known Thornton for years. He's after my project, the complex. We're negotiating. You're helping him. Aren't you?" Elizabeth backed up, bumping into a shelf, paper spilling. "I don't know any Thornton," she stammered, her voice faltering. As if she didn't believe her own lie, it was just a regular customer, Miss Leavitt, exaggerating Karoline. Didn't let her dodge. She opened her phone's notes, reading aloud. 3:15 Elizabeth gave confidential. USB to Thornton, she mentioned. Project and Reikio. She was tense after he left. She looked up, eyes sharp. "Think I didn't notice you didn't just discriminate against me. You're betraying this bank. And my husband's company, the bank, froze a young customer. Earbuds dangling, mumbled, 'This is wild.'" The older man from before nodded, saying loudly, "If true, this bank's got a big problem." Elizabeth looked around, desperate for an escape, but the crowd's eyes were no longer neutral. Sarah lowered her head, silent. Nicholas turned to mark the employee who'd shown sympathy. "What do you know about this?" he asked, his voice firm but not threatening. Mark hesitated, glanced at Elizabeth, then spoke softly. "I saw Miss Carter meet a man this morning. She told him to keep quiet, but she gave him a USB." Mark's words were a final blow. Elizabeth shouted, "Shut up, you know nothing." But Nicholas cut her off. "Enough," he said, his voice booming like a command. He pulled out his phone, dialing. "I need to speak to this bank's senior manager now." He faced Elizabeth, unrelenting. "You leaked information of Thornton data that could ruin my project, cost millions. This isn't just discrimination, it's economic sabotage." Elizabeth trembled, grasping for excuses. "I was just doing my job. I didn't know about Thornton or any project as work stress." But her words were feeble, convincing. "No one." Karoline stepped up, her voice low, but powerful. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You targeted me for my beliefs, but you crossed a line with Thornton." Nicholas nodded, pride flickering in his eyes as he looked at Karoline. He turned to the guard, now standing, quietly, no longer blocking her. "Get the manager out here," he said, "and make sure Miss Carter doesn't leave until this is sorted." The guard nodded, hurrying to the back office. Elizabeth slumped into a chair, face ashen, her arrogance gone. Sarah edged away, distancing herself. Customers buzzed, some snapping photos, sensing this would hit the internet. Soon Karoline stood by Nicholas, feeling like she climbed a mountain. She hadn't just saved her transaction, she'd exposed a plot that could destroy their family and business. Nicholas touched her shoulder, his voice soft. "You did great." Karoline gave a small smile, but her eyes stayed sharp, tracking Elizabeth. She thought of Nico, the value she wanted to pass on: truth, justice, courage. She knew Elizabeth had lost, but the victory didn't fully satisfy the injustice she'd faced. Left a scar, a reminder that the world still needed fixing. An older man in a suit approached, his voice low, mislead. "I don't share your views, but this you were right. No one deserves that treatment." The unexpected words made Karoline nod, a spark of hope. In the storm, she met Nicholas's eyes, a silent vow. They get through this together. The bank manager emerged from the office, face grim. "Mr. Reikio, Miss Leavitt, please explain what's happening," he said. Nicholas handed him the phone, his voice calm but firm. "Here's the proof. Miss Carter betrayed this bank and tried to harm my company. I want her fired effective immediately." Elizabeth Carter, once smug with her fake smile, now sat slumped behind a counter, face pale, stripped of any authority. The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, stood before her, holding Nicholas's phone with the confidential USB photo. Clearly displayed. Customers still murmured, their tone now more indignant than curious. Karoline felt the weight of victory, but it wasn't as sweet as she'd expected. The injustice she'd endured left a deep mark. Mr. Henderson turned to Nicholas, his voice grave. "Mr. Reikio, Miss Leavitt, I'm sorry for what happened. We'll investigate immediately." He looked at Elizabeth, his gaze stern. "Miss Carter, you're suspended effective. Now please leave the bank." Elizabeth opened her mouth to protest, but Henderson stared silence. So the guard stepped forward, gently but firmly escorting her to the back door. Sarah, Elizabeth's colleague, bowed her head, quietly returned to work. As if to dodge any connection, Karoline watched Elizabeth go, feeling no glee, only a twinge of sorrow. She didn't want anyone to lose their job, but Elizabeth's actions, from discrimination to betrayal, couldn't be excused. Nicholas rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "You did the right thing. They need to face consequences." She nodded, drawing strength from him, yet her heart remained heavy. She thought of Nico, wondering how to teach her son to navigate a world rife with bias. Nicholas faced Henderson. "I want assurance this won't happen again," he said, unyielding. "Your bank needs to rethink how it treats customers and its staff." Henderson nodded, his face contrite. "Will launch a full investigation. Any further violations will be dealt with." In the weeks that followed, the Metropolitan Bank underwent a major overhaul. The investigation revealed Elizabeth hadn't acted alone. She'd shared financial data with Thornton and other rivals, not just about Nicholas's project, but other clients too. Sarah received a warning for complicity, but kept her job after a sincere apology. Mark, who'd quietly supported Karoline, was promoted to countermanage a decision that made her smile when she heard he'd chosen truth. Even in small ways, the bank issued new policies mandating regular training on professional ethics and fairness. In service hollow, inclusivity slogans were replaced with real commitments. Every customer, regardless of views or fame, must be treated equally. Karoline read the announcement on the bank's website, feeling it was a small but meaningful step in the fight against unfairness. For her part, Karoline took time to reflect back home where Nico played with building blocks, oblivious to adult turmoil. She sat beside him, stroking his hair, thinking how she'd share this story with him someday, not to breed resentment, but to teach resilience and justice. Nicholas walked in, wrapping his arms around her. "You okay?" He asked, his voice gentle. "Fine," she said, her voice catching. Just didn't expect something so simple to turn into this. Nicholas nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "The world's tough, but you did what few can. You stood up." They sat together, talking about the future, about shielding Nico from the division they saw growing. Karoline knew she couldn't change everything, but she could shape how her family faced the bank incident spread. Quickly, some conservative sites praised Karoline for exposing liberal bias, but she disliked how they turned her ordeal into a political weapon. She also faced criticism from self-styled progressive groups, calling her an exaggerator for attention. She read the comments, but didn't let them sway her. She'd long learned, you can't please everyone, but you can live true to your values. Karoline met Mark again when she returned to the bank to finish the stalled transaction. He shook her hand, his voice earnest. "You changed this place. Thank you." She smiled, feeling a cycle close. The bank was calmer, now free of Elizabeth's overt bias. But Karoline knew these changes were just a start. Prejudice didn't vanish with one investigation. She thought of others who might face similar unfairness, not just in banks, but everywhere. She jotted down her thoughts, not to boast victory, but to remind herself why she fought. She wanted Nico to grow in a world where truth was valued, where people were judged by actions, not political labels. Karoline gazed out her home's window, sunset, bathing Washington, D.C. She felt lighter, but not naive enough to think all was perfect. Her journey, and her family's, was far from over. But today she'd won, not just for herself, but for what she believed in. Karoline Leavitt sat in her White House office, light from the windows spilling across a desk strewn with papers. Before her was a finished speech, its words heavy with her Metropolitan Bank experience. She'd chosen to share her story, not to flaunt victory, but to send a message. Injustice from any political label cannot be tolerated. She rose, stepping to the familiar podium where she'd faced biting press questions today. Her voice rang clear. "I was targeted for my beliefs, but I didn't let that define me. Truth and justice must rise above all divides, liberal or conservative." Her words reached the audience, some nodding, others quietly reflecting. She knew not everyone agreed, but she'd done what was needed back home. Karoline hugged Nico, her little boy beaming with a toy car. Nicholas stood beside her, his eyes shining with pride. "You said something vital," he said, pulling her close. She smiled, the burden lifting, looking out the window, moonlight washing over Washington, D.C. She saw hope, not for a flawless world, but for small changes step by step. Karoline knew her story would inspire someone somewhere to stand for truth for her. That was enough. She was ready for new challenges, carrying the belief that justice is always worth fighting for. The story of Karoline Leavitt at the Metropolitan Bank mirrors a painful reality in today's United States. Political polarization can turn everyday interactions into battlegrounds of prejudice. When Karoline was unfairly treated by Elizabeth Carter for her conservative stance, from delayed transactions to being called controversial, it exposed how liberal or conservative labels are often used to judge people before their actions. Elizabeth's bias favoring seemingly progressive customers while dismissing Karoline or a man in a conservative shirt reflects a society where political prejudice seeps into places like bank spaces meant to be impartial. Karoline's persistence in noting detailed, snapping photos of the confidential USB and confronting with evidence shows the power of truth against unfairness, while Nicholas's arrival and the bank's overhaul highlight the value of unity and collective action. The lesson here is, in a divided society, we must hold fast to patience and seek truth rather than let emotions or biases guide us. Like Karoline, when facing injustice, calmly gather evidence, notes, recordings, or simply listening before acting. Don't let political labels blind you. Instead, treat people based on their actions. As Mark quietly supported Karoline, finally, like her speech, speak out for justice, not to divide, but to build a community where truth is valued no matter where you stand on the political spectrum. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of justice and truth like Karoline's journey. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next.